Pani and the history surrounding that. But it's also important to understand the origins of the Indian National Congress. Of course, it did play a critical role in our independence, but it was originally conceived, as you write, a safety valve by A.O. Hume, among others, and some would say weakened the nationalist fervor and anti-British sentiment in the country in the initial decades after the revolt of 1857. Tell us a little more about that.
So this is actually widely known. It's not something I have invented or discovered. Many historians have pointed this out, that the Congress was actually set up by the British. And the idea was that it would be a safety valve, because do remember that this is just a couple of decades after the Great Revolt. And so they were always afraid that, this large populous country would rise and revolt. So what they did is they created this organization called the Indian National Congress, and they filled it with people who were frankly loyalists. So if you read some of the original debates in the Congress for the first couple of decades of its existence, they're actually quite painful to read, because they, first, even if you made some minor sort of point that the speaker is trying to make, they'll come with a long sort of preface on how they are loyal to the crown, and then make some very small demand. This goes on to essentially the turn of the century, when, as you said, the Lal Bal Pal trio turn up. Incidentally, there was another person it was actually 4 people, because there was another person, and that was a gentleman called Sri Aurobindo Ghosh, now remembered as the sage Sri Aurobindo. But he was actually in some ways the intellectual father of the revolutionary movement as it started. So he is the one who gave the intellectual framework under which something called the Anushilan Samiti, which was a network of akhadas, by the way, originally. And that became ultimately the sort of the backbone of this revolutionary effort.
You talk about the Anushilan Samitis and the network of akhadas, but I want to ask you, we are a secular state, but our revolutionary independence movement is steeped in some amount of religious symbolism as well. That part is often glossed over, because the Anushilam Samitis, which were, Aurobindo ji had initiated people into it. People had a sword in one hand and the Bhagavad Gita in the other. Why is this not spoken about as much as it could have been?
It's absolutely true. Hindu revivalism was a very important part of much of what was going on in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Quite apart from the freedom movement, there were sort of important cultural and religious leaders like Swami Vivekananda, for example, who were kind of reviving Hinduism and sort of modernizing it. So this is the context in which this happened. Many of the revolutionaries were very strong Shakta Hindus, i.e. they were Devi worshipping Hindus. Many of these initiation rites were done in front of some version of Adi Shakti, whether it's Durga or Kali or Bhavani. The Vande Mataram, of course, the first 2 stanzas are a national song, but if you read the rest of it, has a lot of Shakta imagery using Durga and so on. So the idea of Bharat Mata or Bhavani Bharati becomes a very important part of the imagery of these revolutionaries. Now, this is not to suggest that they were bigots. There were many non-Hindus as well who were part of this movement. There was Ashfaqullah Khan, Maulvi Barkatullah, Bhikaji Kama, and so on. So it's not that they were sort of narrow-minded bigots, but it is true factually that Hindu symbolism, particularly Devi symbolism, is very important to the armed resistance to the British.
But